I hope everybody's feeling okay this evening. Um, as I was preparing for this talk, I was reminiscing back to when I gave my last talk, which was right after um, the protesting and the rioting started, after the George Floyd murder. And I remember thinking then, how could this possibly get any worse? And so I'm not sure how everybody else is feeling, but I am quite exhausted. I'm exhausted from just kind of a natural anxiety, I think, and fear that maybe we're all experiencing in the wake of COVID-19 and all the civil unrest that is going on. And the quarantining, I've found, has kind of forced upon us this period of self-reflection. It's like we're kind of been forced into this space. And what I think is a result of that is that we end up feeling a lot more vulnerable. And I think there's some frustration around that. Being in a society that generally views vulnerability from this kind of business corporate mentality as something that is weak and shameful. Yet, in our tradition and in our practice, we know that it takes great strength and courage to show our vulnerability. As a matter of fact, in our community, I feel like we really value and celebrate it. So I feel that on top of all this exhaustion is this feeling of feeling very vulnerable. And right then, perfectly at that moment, here comes politics into the picture. And from that vulnerability, I think we all start to experience triggers, like I am. And I think maybe I'm not alone in that sometimes when we think about the political things that are going on or we see the news, we have a very extreme physical reaction. It is certainly emotional, but the emotion and the anger or the frustration, whatever it is that you may be feeling, it also shows up as like a burning feeling in my chest sometimes, not in my stomach. Feel my pulse accelerate. Tension, a lot of tension in my neck and even on my face sometimes I'm feeling this tension. So in this space of self-reflection, it makes me think, what are these triggers and what is really behind them that brings this severe physical reaction? And I'm reminded of one of the first lessons I think I ever learned from Dogen, where he said to take the backward step and turn the light inward. So with this physical feeling that comes in when we feel triggered, I wonder if we can allow space for it. And something that I've thought about with some other work I've done was just just saying hello to it. What is this feeling? Having a curiosity. What is this? Just saying hello to it, giving it space, letting it be there, and not trying to do anything with it. And what I believe is behind much of this feeling is trauma. And what I've been discovering is that trauma, especially trauma that we experience as children, childhood trauma, can create a lot of sticky issues and can create a lot of twisted things that get twisted all up inside us, and it's very difficult to kind of make sense out of it. Something I was introduced to recently that maybe illustrates the most extreme example of this is a condition that's called DID, or Dissociative Identity Disorder, which in the past used to be called multiple personality disorder. And there's a few things in learning about this that kind of resonated for me. So the thing about dissociative identity disorder, DID, there's a few things that if someone has this, you know for certain that there was a repeated childhood trauma. So when someone has received some kind of repeated trauma before a certain age, it's usually around 8 or 9, that's when DID can happen, and that's the only time and the only way that DID can happen. So what happens with all people is that we're all born with an array, a cast, as you might say, of different aspects of who we are, different aspects of our personality. And as we grow up, and when we around the time of 9 or 10, all these characters start to integrate, and they become the one person that you are. But what happens is when you're a child and you receive this trauma, what happens is that those personalities all split and break off. And so they don't integrate and they don't become one. And so these personalities they're not all resemblance of you. There's people with DID have alters, they call them alters, that are different sexes, different sexual orientations, different races. It's purely coming from your creativity. Actually, we don't know purely where it's coming from, but it's a creative expression of your witnessing of the world and your witnessing of your surroundings. A lot of the times, the host, who's the person who's, it's hard to say that this is the person, because they were all the person, but the host is the one that identifies with the body that they're in, and all the alters, sometimes depending on circumstance, will take control and host the body themselves. And this is always done in an energy to serve you, to help you. So all of these different characters, and what started to resonate for me was noticing that, because I don't have DID, but there was something about this. There was a kernel in this that resonated for me, and in my story and in my path, noticing different types of characters, or different types of parts. Sometimes I call it parts of myself, different parts of myself. And at a certain point, maybe we can all relate to this in some way, and that maybe there's sometimes that you've noticed a certain part of yourself that that doesn't seem to serve you. It doesn't really seem to be helpful for you, but it's almost impossible to drop it. It's hard to let go of it. And I think one of the most clear examples of this is the inner critic, right? We all have a kind of critical voice that we hear in our heads. And I think it's important, and it's been important in my path, to remember that all these different parts of ourselves, even the ones that don't seem to serve us, were originally created to serve and to help, and even in some cases to actually save us. And so, if it's true that these triggers are stimulating our past trauma, it's very, very important in this time to be very patient and compassionate with ourselves. I think that it's a very, very, very important time for us to be aware of self-care, that we're taking care of ourselves, and for it to be in the direction and in the energy for our healing. And when I was thinking of this, it made me think back to our study text from the summer, Painting of a Rice Cake, when Dogen wrote, "If you say a painting is not real, then the myriad things are not real. If the myriad things are not real, then Buddha Dharma is not real. And as Buddha Dharma is real, a painted rice cake is real." So our internal experience is real. And what happens in our minds is also real. Some of these people with DID, their authors would explain their experience and how they've, I guess in the person's mind, have created sometimes islands or cities where they live while the host is living in the body. And when they speak, it's like a person speaking. So these things are real. The things that happen in our mind are real, and it's important for us to see them and give them that space where we're not trying to force anything, and where we're staying gentle and soft with ourselves and compassionate in this moment when this comes up, and especially in this extremely triggering time. So I was reminded of a movie from about 20 years ago called Touching the Void. I'm not sure if anybody has seen this movie, and it was a reenactment. It was a true story, and the three people that were actually involved in this story were the narrators of it, and they had actors that were portraying what happened. And what happened was these two mountain climbers spent about 3 days climbing up straight up a cliff in the Andes. And once they got to the top, they started to make their way down. And one of the climbers, the ground, while he was walking, the ground gave away underneath him, and he fell a considerable 10 to 20 feet, something like that. And the way that he landed, he completely shattered his leg. His leg was completely broken. There's no way for him to move. So his buddy came up with a plan that he tied both of their ropes together. I think they were about 100 feet each, so it was about 200 feet. And he tied it around his friend, he would lower him down until the rope ended, and then he would climb down to meet him, and he kept doing this. Well, at one point when he did this, he couldn't see below him, and his buddy went over a cliff and was hanging 50 feet from the top of the cliff and about a good 50 feet from the bottom, which was an opening into a huge crevice. After a number of hours, his friend couldn't hold him anymore. He didn't know why. He couldn't see, and he didn't know why the rope wasn't loosening, and it was starting to pull him off. So at a certain point, he had no choice but to cut the rope. So he cuts the rope. The guy falls into the crevice and miraculously survives, unbeknownst to his buddy. His buddy is sure that his friend has died, and he ends up hiking back down. But so this guy wakes up in the crevice, and after probably one of the most horrible nights of his life, decides that he's going to try and find a way out. And so he lowers himself with the ropes that he does have, because it's impossible to climb out. He lowers himself deeper into the mountain until he sees some light coming through, and there's a way out. And he finally gets out of the crevice. But then he has this enormous journey ahead of him down the mountain with a leg that is shattered. Now, it took him a couple days, and he finally did it without food or water. And he said that the one thing that kept him going was the fear of dying alone. And he does eventually finally crawl into the camp. Luckily, his buddy was still there. He was too exhausted to leave, and he's found. And I saw this as a kind of a metaphor for what happens to us in varying degrees with our trauma. And I think it's important for us to identify at a certain point what the cutting of the rope was for you, what the breaking of your leg and then the cutting of the rope was that dropped you into this crevice. And this whole journey that we have to go through down this mountain, completely hobbled, where when we finally arrive, it's amazing that we're found, but our leg is still broken. And to me, that was a metaphor for that. Once we finally do make this journey, and you could turn around and really be appreciative for the distance that you've come. Once you get there, you don't have to do it alone. As a matter of fact, it's important that you accept the support. And so, even though he was found, they had to take the journey out of the valley and into the city while his leg was still shattered. But that we can do this, and that we can finally fix that leg, and that we can walk, run, jump, and even climb once again. So the other day I was sitting outside writing, and this thought came to me. I had a memory of a single note that one of my heroes in music played, and his name was Kenny Dorham, and he was a trumpet player that was around during the 40s, 50s, and the 60s. He died in 1970 at a young age, but in his 50s. And he played with Charlie Parker first when he was coming up, and got into the jazz scene playing with one of the greats of all time. And then in the 60s, he formed a band with this a saxophone player that was a good 10 to 20 years, 15 years younger than him. And he started making these records with these younger bands. And he was opening himself up to the new music of the young people and allowing himself to learn something new, something that this new younger generation was offering him. And in this recording, this one note had this quality to it where it was like he held this note and it was crackling and it was wavering and it felt a little broken even, and it sounded almost like he was imitating what a child who picked up a trumpet for the first time would sound like. And it reminded me of Picasso saying that he was always trying to remember how to draw like he did when he was 3. Yet there was something intentional. It was a very intentional note, and there was something very bold about it. And just the thought of it, I've listened to this recording so many times, just the thought of that just shot through my heart. And I started to weep. And I thought about why. And it was because he had the courage to really show his vulnerability in that moment, to really show who he was in that one note that I was thinking about 60 years after it happened, and it was affecting me so deeply. And this made me think of this little passage I read recently about Ananda, who was the third patriarch. After Buddha, there was Shanavasa, and then Shanavasa empowered Ananda. And this is written by Sensei Mui Baragato. He says, Ananda's patience was incredible. And so just another little backstory. Ananda had a photographic memory. So I didn't know this before, but Ananda was the one who recorded all of the sutras because he had this photographic memory. So he started early on. And so Ananda probably joined Buddha's group on his 20s. And he stayed with Buddha as his attendant for 25 years. Ananda was not to be the Buddha's successor because he had not yet found his word. Mahakasyapa, the chosen one, had found his word. Ananda subsequently was Mahakasyapa's attendant for 20 more years before attaining enlightenment. So he patiently studied and persevered for 45 years before he was enlightened and finally found his word. So, just like to end by saying that word, or that one note that I experienced from Kenny Dorham, can truly heal ourselves and consequently the whole world. So, I leave you with just a question, thinking, what is your word? And what is that one note for you? Thank you.